Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Wine and Web3. I'm your host, Jana Kryline, certified wine geek, co-founder of dVIN Labs, and your front row seat to where wine and Web3 collide. This week, I'm joined by my co-founder, David Garrett, and we're shifting the spotlight from Bordeaux's left bank to the right bank. So this is where plush Merlot blends, iron-rich soils, and iconic appellations like Saint-Emilion and Pomerol take center stage. And of course, in true dVIN fashion, we are not stopping at terroir. We're going to be digging into how wine-backed lending, made possible by tokenized bottles and smart contracts, can unlock capital in a traditionally illiquid asset class. It's funny, right? You would think that wine was already liquid, but you would be wrong. Okay. If you're short on time, don't worry. We always kick things off with a TLDR, so you'll still get the core takeaways even if you can't stick around for the full hour. So here it is, TLDR coming at you. This episode is kind of a double feature. So first, we're going to break down the Right Bank's unique terroir, everything from Saint-Emilion's classification puzzle to Pomerol's kind of powerful and polished Merlot. But most importantly, we're going to talk about why these wines deserve a strategic spot in any collector's cellar. Then we're going to zoom out and look at how the dVIN protocol enables wine-backed lending. This is big, guys. So pay attention. We are talking about how by tokenizing bottles and using smart contracts to automate loan terms, we're actually turning sellers into capital without forcing collectors or producers to sell their inventory prematurely. So you're going to learn why digital corks are the backbone of verifiable wine assets, how bonded storage and verified custodianship support secure collateral, and how tokenized bottles can unlock borrowing power while keeping your portfolio intact. Imagine. We're also going to resurface a really fun little story from Jane Anson's unforgettable Petrus in space tasting, because yes, that actually happened. And yes, it is still relevant. If you care about how wine moves from passion to portfolio and from bottle to blockchain, then this episode is definitely for you. Let's get into it. Welcome back to another Wine Wednesday. Last week, we talked about left bank Bordeaux. This week, we are back in Bordeaux, but we're going to be exploring the right bank. We're also going to be digging into our weekly topic. So if you don't know, every Sunday, Dave puts out a really informative long-form article on our Medium channel. And you can visit the Medium channel at news.dvinlabs.com. And you'll be able to read back. What week are we on, Dave? Are we on week 8?
I don't know.
B?
Couple of months.
7 or 8. Anyway, so this week's topic is wine-backed lending and how that creates financial flexibility for the industry. Obviously, we're talking about the wine industry. So before we get into that and before we get really into the right bank, let's do intros. So I'm your host, Jana Kryline, if you don't know me already, certified wine geek and co-founder of dVIN Labs. And this is David Garrett. Dave, I'll let you introduce yourself.
I'm Dave Garrett, co-founder and CEO of dVIN Labs, tech and wine geek for 20 years, 30 years. Oh.
Hey, that's good. That's good experience. Been drinking wine for longer, right?
Exactly.
All right, cool. So those of you who don't know dVIN Labs, I'll give you kind of like the blurb before we dive in too far. So we're building kind of the foundational infrastructure to tokenize the $1 trillion. I love saying trillion, Dave knows. So the $1 trillion wine asset class. So through our protocol, the dVIN protocol, we're turning rare and investment grade wines into digital assets, creating global liquidity, ensuring authenticity, which is very important in the wine industry, and also enabling smart contract-based utilities like topic of the week, lending and insurance, but also AI-powered market insights. So but we'll get into that after. First rule of dVIN is you have to have a glass of wine on Wine Wednesday. At least your hosts do. So I am... I shouldn't be ashamed to say this because it's a high level ashamed. I'm not drinking a wine from the right bank. I'm drinking a wine from the left bank. Oh my God. But the reason that I'm kind of ashamed about it is because I opened it last Wine Wednesdays, which is the same wine. We're doing a little repetitive practice here. And it was kind of like sacrilege. I opened it. It's a really nice bottle of wine. It's Cabernet, it's Pessac Léognan, it's a white, it's Sauvignon Blanc, Semillon, mostly Sauvignon Blanc. It's a phenomenal wine, but I opened it last week. Actually, Jane Anson got to choose which wine I drank last week because she was our guest. We'll talk about that. She chose, I opened it, and then I forgot it in the fridge, which is like sacrilege. So I've had this bottle open. It was like half full, so a lot of oxygen in there. Had it open for a week, and I am very proud to tell you that it is still very good. So not as good as it was a week ago, but it's still really good. It's very peachy now, whereas it was much more like citrusy and zippy last week. Now it's very, the acidity is very like toned down and kind of not muted completely, but it's given me white peach, a lot of white peach. Dave, what are you drinking? Dave did his homework, I'm sure, and is drinking from the Right Bank.
I am drinking from the Right Bank, the Chateau Mazares. So it's I'm going to show you the bottle. This is it's one of my favorite Right Bank Pomerol. 100%. I mean, it's Pomerol, 100% Merlot, and 2,000-year-old vineyard, something like that. Like it's one of the few vineyards in Bordeaux where they found Roman ruins. It's a really great old vineyard. Super amazing place, and one of the few places that has like in the soil of vineyard there's deposits of iron oxide, which is it that works. It's really, you only find that on Right Bank, so that's where you want to plant your Merlot. Like that's the iron oxide really works with the Merlot and gives you that kind of rich Merlot, the rich Merlot flavors. So just Right Bank, Left Bank. Jana, do you want to help tell people?
Mm-hmm.
Do you want to tell people what that is? I know I assume that you did it last week with Jane, but now that we're Right Bank, why don't we do it again?
Yeah. So if you want to hear about the Left Bank, those of you who don't know who Jane Anson is, last week we were joined by Jane. She's like one of the most respected voices in wine in general, but she's like a walking masterclass on Bordeaux specifically. She was the Bordeaux kind of correspondent for Decanter for 20 years. She has since launched her own website, janeanson.com. You need to check it out. And if you've ever looked into learning anything about Bordeaux, I'm sure that you've read Jane's work. But she was just awesome. We did a really interesting deep dive into kind of like a recap on the 2024 Bordeaux en Primeur, which was very interesting, especially because it's like a complete market reset. So prices are down like 25 to 30% for some of the top chateaus. It's big news in the wine world right now. So if you want to check that out, we turned it into a podcast episode that came out on Saturday. And you can always get the recap on our Substack. So that's news.clubdvin.com, and check out the latest podcast. You can also find it. Our podcasts are available everywhere where podcasts live. So Apple, Spotify, the works. And I really encourage you to listen to that. We talked about a lot of really interesting insights, and she gave some pretty cool tips about what she thinks is really interesting and maybe worth looking into. So Left Bank, Right Bank. Dave was talking about iron oxide in the soils on the Right Bank and why that's good for Merlot. So Merlot is the key grape on the Right Bank of Bordeaux. The classification is very, very different there. We'll talk about that a little bit in a second. But Left Bank, Right Bank, usually you're going to have Cabernet Sauvignon dominant blends on the Left Bank. That's where you're going to have those, big first growth chateaus that you've heard of. And then that's where the 1855 classification happened. And so, your Lafite and Mouton Rothschild and Latour, and that's all on the Left Bank. On the Right Bank, you've got Merlot dominant blends. And that's where you're going to find those chateaus that you've heard of, I'm sure. Le Pin, Petrus, Cheval Blanc. So that's kind of the difference in the chateaus. Classification system is very, very different. We talked about it for the Left Bank with Jane. On the Right Bank, you're always going to see when you're, if you're buying wine at a grocery store or at just any kind of wine shop, you'll notice there are a lot of bottles that say Saint-Emilion Grand Cru on the label. And sometimes you might pick that up and be like, wow, I'm drinking a Saint-Emilion Grand Cru. Now, that is a bit tricky just because that's the name of the appellation, not the classification. So if you're looking at a bottle that says Grand Cru Classe A or Grand Cru Classe B, those are the top tier. That's the hierarchy. So Grand Cru Classe A is like Chateau Figeac or Cheval Blanc. Or, yeah, those are your big guns from the right bank. But yes, left bank gravelly soils. And Dave was talking a little bit about some kind of, that was deep dive stuff, Dave. Iron oxide in the soil. Jeez Louise.
Well, and here's why, because I'm not a giant fan of Merlot.
Yeah.
I mean, I like good Merlots, nice Merlots. Read expensive Merlots. But I am a giant fan of Cabernet Franc and have been for a really long time. Whenever I can find a really good Cabernet Franc, something that's 100% Cabernet Franc or majority Cabernet Franc, like those are the real finds. And I learned that from winemaker friends, right? Winemakers love to find Cabernet Franc. And one of my favorite winemakers, Santiago Achaval in Argentina, my favorite wine of his was the wine that he never even sold. He just took the leftover Cabernet Franc from one of his blends and bottled it and made, I don't know, 100, 200 bottles a year, something tiny. And it was only for friends, or like sold it sometimes to people on the list. And that was always my favorite wine of his. And so I do the same thing here and I really try to find some of these like single vineyard Cabernet Francs, and the best ones are from the right bank. Yeah.
Or Cheval Blanc, which is like a famous right bank, very, very famous right bank investment grade wine that has more, it's a little bit different than most Merlot dominant wines on the right bank because it has majority Cabernet Franc usually in the blend. But okay, so Dave was talking about iron oxide. Generally, right bank is clay rich. So if your iron oxide is like, Dave's being a wine geek, that's why we love Dave. But yeah,
I'm a vineyard geek.
Yeah. Okay. Well, fair. So am I. So yeah, wines on the right just tend to be softer and more plush and approachable in their youth, and the top bottles age beautifully like the left bank, but just different styles. Key appellations you're going to think about or recognize are Pomerol and Saint-Emilion. And then, like I said, names that you're going to want to remember are Petrus. You've probably heard that one. Chateau Cheval Blanc we talked about. And yeah, there's among others. But I want to stop on Petrus because last week I have to apologize for those of you who are tuning in again. I did a teaser and then I left everyone hanging. So I was asking Jane, and I didn't explain myself. I was asking Jane why Petrus might be particularly interesting to her and if she'd ever had a really interesting experience with Petrus. And it turns out she has. Jane actually got to taste Petrus that has been to space. And I wanted her to tell the story, but then we just got caught up and we were talking about so many more things and market prices and etc. So I asked Jane if she could be here again tonight to tell the story. She's at a dinner. So I'm going to share my screen. And for a minute, Jane's going to tell the story for you on a video. Okay. Just 1 second here, guys. Share. As long as
this is cool. It's a blast from the past.
It's a blast from the past. I know. Okay. Hold on. Let's get Jane up here to tell the story about the wine that went to space.
One of my best moments in wine was when I tasted the wine that had been in space. They sent Petrus up to the International Space Station and it stayed on there for, I can't remember how long now, 3 months. Anyway, and then it came back to Earth and I was the only journalist. There were 12 of us who were on the tasting panel. And I was the only journalist on the panel. And that was an amazing experience as well that I'll never forget. The interesting thing was in the room where we were tasting, it was a triangular tasting. They were all blind. So we either had 2 Earth Petruses and 1 space Petrus, and other people had 2 space Petrus and 1 Earth Petrus. And you had to basically see if you could identify the difference. So I did identify the difference. It turned out I had 1 space and 2 Earth. And for me, it just tasted a little bit more evolved, a little bit more kind of roses and truffles rather than intense spice and fruit that you have when Petrus is very young. So yeah, it was delicious, but it was also just exciting to be in that room and part of that tasting.
Very, very cool. Okay. So I feel like I owed you guys that. And every time I watch that video, I actually don't know if you guys could only see Jane or if you could see me grinning like an idiot, but I was grinning like an idiot. Every time I watch that video, it's so cool. I mean, that's
pretty cool.
There's what other wine story is cooler than like wine doesn't go to space very often, guys. I don't know if you knew that. Okay. Where were we? So, okay, we did a regional overview, right? We talked about Jane. We talked about kind of what to expect from the Right Bank. Now,
talked about what we're drinking. We talked about my dirty glass. Did we talk about my dirty glass?
We didn't.
Can you see that?
Yeah.
It's foul.
Oh, yeah. Dave, you know what? God, we can't do this. We can't do this if you're not going to wash the glassware.
It's washed. I just didn't polish. I don't polish at home. I never worked in a restaurant, so I don't polish. I'm not very good at polishing.
I will tell you, I don't polish my glasses because I use Salto glasses at home. I know Salto glasses, if you don't know, are just phenomenal glasses. Very fine, like that. They're just really thin. You don't polish a Salto glass. It's far too dangerous. Anyway, so let's unlock the cellar, Dave. Literally.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about a powerful financial tool, which is wine-backed lending. If you haven't read the article, again, you should go and check out all Dave's long-form articles. He wrote this piece and put it out on Sunday.
If you're having trouble sleeping, I highly recommend our Medium. It's riveting content.
It is real. Come on. I know you're being sarcastic, but it is riveting content. It's game-changing, people.
Game-changing. Yeah.
It is. Okay. All right, Dave. Can you give us like an overview of why traditional financing doesn't really work well for wine producers or merchants?
Well, I mean, so here's the thing. Wine, and I say this all the time, and people get bored of me saying it, but wine is unlike any other product in the world. It's just really, it's unique. And it's unique because one of the reasons that it's unique is because it has this incredibly long gestation period between the time that it's produced and the time that it's consumed. So try to think of any other product in the world that is produced one day and not consumed for 5 or 10 or 15 years later. Nearly everything else in the world, it's produced and then it's sold and then it's consumed, and like sometimes in a couple days, sometimes in a couple weeks, sometimes in a couple months, but almost always in the same calendar year, right? So from a production point of view, like think about how you manage money if you're a business, right? You put, like, let's say you were a vodka business. Well, you put the money into producing the vodka. And then, it takes like a couple of weeks to make the vodka. And then you bottle the vodka, and then you sell the vodka, and then somebody drinks the vodka. And all of that process happens in 2 months, maybe 3 months. And then you do it again. And then you take the money that they gave you when they bought the vodka to consume it, and you put it into making more vodka. And then you sell that, and then you take that money and you put it into making more vodka, right? So it's this little cycle, and almost every business is the same way. If it's t-shirts or tube socks or cars or furniture or any other thing that you can think of, that's how it works. You put money into creating something, you produce it, you sell it, it's consumed, and then you take that same money, the money that you got for selling it, and you put it back into making the next wine, or the next cycle of of whatever the product is. But with wine, it doesn't really work that way, right? You make the wine and you can only do it once a year. No other product in the world that you can only make once a year. I mean, even garlic and onions Like there are multiple harvests per year,
Yeah.
flowers,
You
multiple
can't,
harvests per year.
yeah. You can't make wine in a greenhouse. I'm sure people are thinking, well, but why couldn't you? No, it doesn't work that way.
So wine it's the only one. So like, and then you only make it once a year, and then you typically have to wait 4 or 5 years before it's consumed, which means 4 or 5 or 10 or 15 years, which means that like you keep spending. I spend to make the wine, and then I spend to make it next year, and then I spend to make it the next year, and then I spend to make it the next year, and then someday in the future I'll make a little bit of revenue.
How long did it take you when you did the vines of Mendoza, when you had like raw land before you turned a profit?
So it was 10 years. So from the day that we invested our first dollar in the vineyard to the day that we made our first dollar in revenue was 10 years. From selling the wine, we did a bunch of other things. We made revenue in a bunch of other ways. But from the actual wine, it was 10 years. So that's a really long time, which means that it's super capital intensive. And when businesses are super capital intensive, that lowers the margin, right? Because how you make money in a business is you invest money and then to make a thing, and then you sell the thing, and the margin is your profit, right? But if you have to keep putting money into making something, then your capital requirements are really high. And then when you start selling, especially if your capital requirements are multiple years, it just makes the whole wine business not very profitable, not as profitable as it could be.
Okay. So question is though, like, why is it so difficult to use wine as a loan collateral?
Sure. So what other businesses do, mature, real businesses in the real world, what they do if they need capital is they borrow against their assets.
Yeah, there we go.
So you can borrow, like if you need capital to invest in whatever, expansion, your production, whatever it is, if you need working capital, you typically borrow that working capital, right? You borrow against against your assets. Well, with wine, it's really hard to borrow against your assets. Your biggest asset is your wine, right? You got 4 or 5 years worth of wine. That's your biggest asset. But you can't borrow against it because, like, think about it. If you're a bank, what are you going to do? You're going to come and count the bottles? Like, how do you know that the wine exists? How do you know that even if it does exist today, like I come into the winery, I count the bottles, how do I know that you haven't sold it? Like the day when I leave, like you sell it to someone and now you've got a loan outstanding, but your collateral's all gone. If you default on your loan, what am I going to do? Show up with a truck if I'm a bank and like put it in the back of the truck and take it where and do what with it? Like it's a really, really bad asset to borrow against, which is why most banks don't lend against wine. So you've got this problem where you've got a business, giant business, $1 trillion asset class, super capital intensive, which makes it not very profitable, makes the whole business very lean and not very profitable. And the big asset that they have, they can't create any liquidity from. They can't borrow against. So they're kind of in this bind.
Yeah. Well, okay. The article talks about, actually, as a comparison, the article talks about Italy, where banks actually hold like wheels of Parmesan cheese as loan collateral. Like, how is that different than what we're doing?
So that happens. There's the cheese bank in Parma. Everybody's probably read about that, where it's a bank that holds the cheese as collateral. So, and that works out really well. But like, that's a kind of a one-off, right? Because those wheels of cheese are very, very valuable. They age for a specific amount of time. And like, that is one potential solution. And that solution was, I think, from the 1600s, right? Isn't the cheese bank like 400-year-old bank?
I'm going to have to look that up, but
I think so.
Yeah, the cheese bank. Yeah.
That's one solution. The other solution is you give each bottle of wine a deed of ownership. And then once it has a deed of ownership, now it becomes an asset that you can borrow against, right?
Okay. So we'll get into how dVIN solves that in a second. But there's one more kind of comparison or reference, I suppose, that I think probably a a bunch of our community members have heard of and are interested in understanding better. So how does a platform like Baxis, like how does that model, how is that set up in comparison to what we're doing? Because whiskey is also aged for a long time, but it's very different than wine, just because, I mean, for 1,000 reasons, but production of wine, number one, and the fourth scarcity, but yeah.
So Baxis is more like the cheese bank. Typically, a consumer isn't buying a whole wheel of Parmesan,
Right.
right? In the same way that a consumer isn't buying like a whole barrel of whiskey. So what happens is the Parmesan, it ages in a wheel. Whiskey, it ages in a barrel, right? And those barrels are stored in a rick house. And what Baxis does is they tokenize those barrels, and which creates the ability for the owners of those barrels to be able to get to either sell them as futures, or they can borrow against the barrels. Wine is a little bit different, right? Like typically whiskey will age in a barrel, and then you'll bottle it and someone will buy it and consume it. And that happens in a month or 2 months or 3 months, right? Like that's the thing that happens in the same year. Whereas with wine, you'll bottle it and someone isn't going to drink it for 5 or 10 years after you bottle it, right? So it's already cut down to the consumer size and in the consumer packaging, but it still needs to lay down and be aged for a long period of time. So that's why it's a little bit different. Baxis is very similar to the Parmesan wine model, which is a great model and love what they're doing. But wine is just a different product, right? It's different from whiskey because, again, it lays down for a lot longer and it's distributed for a lot longer, right? Like if it's in the rick house, if your your barrel of whiskey's in the rick house, like that's where it is. It's not going anywhere. Whereas with wine, it's maybe it's at the negociant, maybe it's at the importer, maybe it's at the distributor, maybe it's still at the winery. Like it's just a lot more fluid and also a much, much bigger business.
Yeah. I talked about $1 trillion at the beginning. So the wine asset class is $1 trillion, but the investment grade wine asset class is 300 billion, 350 billion.
Yeah, there's about $300 billion worth of investment grade wine out there in the world.
Yeah. That's big, guys. So
it's huge.
All right. Well, let's talk about solutions then. So how does dVIN's tokenization protocol, and of course, like the digital cork, make wine back loans viable?
Well, it's by creating a deed of ownership, right? Like
the digital cork.
Almost everything that you can like put up as collateral. The reason that you can put it up as collateral is because it has a deed of ownership, right? The big two are like your house. You can borrow against your house because you can take that deed of ownership and perfect the loan with your deed of ownership. Same thing with your car, right? You can borrow against your car. When you buy a car, you get a car loan. And that car loan means that the deed of ownership is partially held by the lender. So that's actually true with most other financial products as well. So for example, if you're trading stocks or bonds and you're trading on margin, margin is just a loan against your assets. And what happens is you've got when you own stocks or bonds, you've got a digital deed of ownership. It says that you own that. And what you're doing is you're putting that deed of ownership in a financial device, a financial instrument that holds that deed while you borrow money against it, and then you use that money to buy more stocks. And if you default on that loan, then you give up the stocks go away. So that's just how nearly every lending instrument works in the world. You need to have a deed of ownership. That's the way it works. With wine, up until now, before the blockchain, it didn't really make sense. How do you have a deed of ownership over a bottle of wine, right? Like when you think about closing costs for real estate, you're paying 1% to have a deed of ownership, like go through that process and change hands, like hundreds or thousands of dollars. Like that doesn't make sense for a bottle of wine. But with the blockchain, it does, right? You've got two important things. One, it's super cheap, costs about a penny. And two, it's global. That deed of ownership can work on a global basis. So no matter what jurisdiction you're in the world, that deed of ownership can say, this person owns this bottle.
That's so interesting in the world of wine. This is, we talk about this in every Wine Wednesday and every webinar and everything we do. But the wine industry is really like archaic in the way that it works. And I think what Dave said a couple of weeks ago, and it was just this light bulb moment. It was so good when you said, if the blockchain didn't exist, we'd have to invent it in order for the wine industry, for this project, of course, to work, but for the wine industry actually to be able to.
Yeah, that's true. Like the wine industry lots of people have tried to modernize the wine industry. Every other industry in the world over the last 30 years has used the internet, digital technology, data, has used all of these great new tools, these great new digital tools that we have to modernize and become more profitable. And in many, many cases, consolidate, right? Lots of industries have consolidated. And the wine industry just hasn't done it. And what I was trying to say when I said that was, like, if you were trying to solve the problems of the wine industry, which lots of people have tried to solve over the last 20 or 30 years, and the blockchain didn't exist, you would have to invent the blockchain to solve those problems. Because what you need is a global, permissionless, immutable ledger. That's what you would need. You would need something where everyone can be on the same platform, but there's 30,000 different winemakers and 10 million different middlemen. You would need something where everyone can be on the same platform on a permissionless basis. And the blockchain is the only thing that I've ever seen that allows you to do that.
Yeah. And I skipped ahead when I jumped in and said order book.
Yeah, that's right.
Order book for wine. Yeah. That too. So let's look at this from a practical perspective. Can you walk us through a scenario, like a lending scenario using tokenized wine?
Sure. So, we can talk about kind of what we're doing now, which is, so working with let's say a negociant or a distributor that buys wine on the Place de Bordeaux, and they've got a portfolio of wine that they are looking to sell at some point in the future. Well, right now they've got basically two choices. One is they sink a bunch of capital and they hold that wine until it's reached the exact perfect price for them to sell it, right? Wine increases in value over time as you get closer to the best drinking window. So it's in their best interest to hold that wine for a longer period of time. But, businesses need money. The next year, maybe they need marketing money. Maybe they need to expand. Maybe they need to buy wine the next year. And so when they need cash right now, they either have to sink a bunch of capital into their business, or they need to sell at a suboptimal time. They need to sell too soon, which again limits their profitability. So in this case, what we're offering is the ability for them to tokenize their wine. So create a digital deed of ownership for each bottle, put the bottle in a bonded warehouse, which is subject to audit by the local tax authority. So you know that it's there and there's like an audit trail of that the wine is there. And then you create a smart contract that is essentially a loan against that wine. One of the parties to the loan is the bonded warehouse. So the bonded warehouse is not allowed to, they can't let the wine out of the warehouse while that smart contract is in place, while that loan is in place, and the wine is collateralized. And then you've got lenders all over the world, including Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, even private lenders, private banks, or pools of individual investors that can lend money against that asset. So you, as the distributor, or as the winemaker, or as a merchant, you can borrow money against that asset because the loan is perfected, right? Meaning, if you borrow money against, let's say I borrow money against $1 million worth of wine, and from Jana, and let's say I don't pay her back, right? Well, according to the terms of the smart contract,
Yeah.
well, automatically if I don't pay her back, because it's all on chain, it's software that's on the blockchain. So I don't pay her back according to that schedule, then the collateral, that wine, automatically just goes to Jana. And now it's owned by Jana, and Jana can do whatever she wants to with it. She can sell it, she can hold it, she can do whatever she wants. So, so what that means is, in kind of financial terms, it means the loan is perfected. And when a loan is perfected, what that creates is better terms, right? You can borrow more against it. Like typically with stocks or bonds, you're borrowing 50 to 70% of the value, and you're paying what, in a regular brokerage account, maybe 5, 6, 7%. In this case, with a perfected loan, you could borrow up to 90% of the value, and you're paying 4 or 5%, which is like a great way for you to have, for you to get working capital to buy next year's wine or to do whatever you want to do with it.
Okay. So who, like in the entire value chain, who stands to benefit the most?
I mean, in the long run, it's going to be the winemaker, right? The winemaker, what it lets the winemaker do over time is to get closer and closer to the consumer. Yeah. And the closer they are to the consumer, the more control they have, and the more margin they'll have per bottle, right? What it actually does, interestingly, is it cuts down on speculation, right? Because speculation in the wine industry is all about, I buy it when it's a future, or when it first comes out in the Place de Bordeaux, and I sell it closer to the maturity date when it's ready to be drank, and I take all that value. I take all the value because I have money. Just because I'm investing money, I get more value than the winery gets. And that's because I'm speculating on the price, but it's not that much of a speculation, right? Wine will typically increase in value over time as you get closer to the date that you can drink it. Not to mention the fact that, you've got inflation, you've got all of those things. It's a really good hedge. It's a great business that people have been doing for 100 years. What this allows is the winemaker to, without having to put tons and tons of capital on the line, they can hold on to that wine until they're really ready to sell it, until the price is right. And as long as the interest rate that they're paying, or the yield that they're paying on the loan, is less than, inflation and the amount that the wine increases in value, then that's just a net positive for them. So I think in the long run, it's the winemaker and the consumer that gets the most value.
I mean, for the consumer, there's all kinds of really positive things that come with the winemaker knowing who they are. We haven't even really touched that on this Wine Wednesday. We could talk for 3 hours about the loyalty and customer acquisition and all of that, kind of that whole side of it. But one of the other really interesting things that's great for the winemaker is royalties. So every time a wine does trade on secondary, the winemaker could be getting a royalty, right? Every single time it trades hands, which is also fantastic. So winemakers...
Great for the winemaker.
Yeah. Really good for the winemaker. Really good for everyone.
We're a winemaker first company.
Yeah.
And have been from the beginning.
Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So we are really close to time.
Wow.
Yeah.
It flew by today, Jana. Flew by.
I know. It really did.
Good job with the agenda. I feel like I've barely said a word.
I could let Dave just go on, and it's fascinating. It is. But I encourage you to read his articles and tune in next week. Again, we're going to be talking about what's our topic next week, actually. Hold on a second, guys. That is one thing. I think it's Syrah versus Shiraz. And it is. Yes, it is. Oh, that's going to be a good one. That's going to be
what I'm going to have.
Northern Rhone.
Yeah.
Me too.
I'm going to have a Syrah. You have a Shiraz. I'll have a Syrah. Yeah, and we'll compare and contrast.
Oh, sure. Okay. One of my all-time favorite wines in the world. Not that it's a specific wine or label, but is like Hermitage. So sure, Dave. You know what? Let's just see. Well, let's see what I find and what I open, because I need to make an order. Anyways, we're close to time. So Shiraz is also not knocking Shiraz, guys.
Love some of that Shiraz. Got to get me some Shiraz.
Get yourself.
I don't see any questions on the Twitter. Are there any questions on YouTube?
We have our amazing producer in the background who's monitoring that. But if anyone does have any questions after, I'm sure a lot of people are going to, play this back. We always publish this in our Substack. So tomorrow the recap is going to come out. If you're listening to it after the live stream, feel free to send your questions on X in the comments where the live stream will also be. It'll be on YouTube for you to leave comments on. And of course, you can always leave comments in the Substack article recap itself. But yeah, this has been a really good one. I also want to give a quick shout out to Bacchus AI. I think Bacchus right now, so Wine Guy on Telegram, as usual, super fast. Like if you haven't played with Wine Guy, go on Telegram and add Wine Guy Bot and ask him all your wine questions. It is a very, very cool tool. It's like your pocket sommelier. And then Bacchus on X is, he's still sassy, but feel free to tag at Bacchus_dVIN, dVIN, on X. And that is basically your Bloomberg terminal for wine. So really cool market insights. He's often comparing investment grade wines to crypto. It's very cool. But yeah, as I said, he's a little bit sassy. So yeah, I'm sure you'll get a kick out of that. Don't be offended. He's a fun guy. He's a wine guy. Cool. So Dave, thank you very much. I am going to finish my long overdue to finish bottle. Cheers. And thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next week with a glass of Syrah or Shiraz. Bye.
Bye-bye.